Welcome to Verses and Visions Creative Conversations, where creativity and purpose meet to inspire and uplift. I'm Cassidy Beck, your host, here to explore the stories of artists, dreamers, and changemakers who are walking in faith and using their unique gifts to make a difference. Each episode is a reminder that your vision, paired with God's purpose, can transform the world around you. Let's get started and spark some inspiration together. Today, I'm thrilled to be welcoming Bennion Ellsworth. Bennion Ellsworth is a husband, father, and author from Cedar City, Utah. He lives there with his wife and 3 daughters. He studied creative writing at Southern Utah University, where he had a total of 8 different majors. After college, Bennion worked in the mental health field for 10 years before changing careers, and now works as a waterworks salesman. He published Jovi Jade and the Monster Under Her Bed in 2021. He passes his time reading, writing, and begging his daughters to eat their vegetables and laughing heartily at his wife's jokes. He proudly proclaims that he is most fond of red and blue. So many things I want to talk to you about. The one that I want to start with is my favorite color is purple. So we're basically the same.
There we go. I didn't know how important my favorite colors were until I had a kid in elementary school. Then suddenly, every day, Dad, are you sure? So it's not big in our house.
I'm sure with all that you are surrounded by, I imagine, a fair amount of pink in your life. Is that fair to say?
So much pink. Sometimes it comes gray to me because I'm just very used to pink.
Well, you mentioned that you were working on 8 majors. Tell me about that.
Well, that story actually came to a conclusion fairly recently. So I would start a major. My dad was an attorney, and so I grew up thinking I was just going to follow in his footsteps and be an attorney as well. And so I came to school planning on doing a pre-law undergraduate degree and then going to law school. About a year into it, I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I switched over to an English major because I thought attorneys write a lot, so I will do an English major and I'll enjoy law school more. About a year into that, I thought, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know what I'm doing. And so then I went back in high school. I did a lot of theater, and I said, well, I'll do theater education. And so I jumped into theater education to teach theater in high school. And after about a year of that, I was like, this is boring. I did sociology. And then I went back to business for about a semester. And I thought, that's a lot of math. I can't do that. Then I finally settled on creative writing, where my dad said, you're married, it's time for you to move on and be done with school. So I just buckled down and did creative writing. I've always loved writing. And so I finally finished my degree in that. And come to find out, in June of 2024, I got diagnosed with ADHD. So come to find out all the stuff where, I get bored of something, even with writing under manuscript because I have a better idea. Some of the other mental health issues that I've had my whole life. Turns out I had ADHD and didn't even know it. It really was a marvelous thing. I feel like it made me well-rounded, that I know a little bit about a lot of different subjects, which as a writer is a valuable tool to be able to fake like I know what I'm talking about. Also, just a little shout out, don't be afraid to look into your mental health and get proper diagnosis and proper medications. It's a marvelous, wonderful thing. It's been all over the place, but a joyous journey, if you will.
Thank you for sharing. I totally put my voice with yours. I think that mental health, like everyone should talk to a therapist. I think it's really, really important. We talk about our physical health all the time. And I think mental health is one that we should regularly get checked up as well. Talk to a therapist is a wonderful thing. So I totally add my voice to yours on that. The other thing is, I feel like that your experience a little bit reflects my own. Although I feel like I was a little bit behind you. What I mean by that is in high school, I decided that I was going to major in business. And my dad was a businessman. That did play into it. And so I was like, this is what I'm going to do. This is who I am 100% in. And so basically in high school, I declared that for myself all through college. There was just not a question. I did love literature. I was able to go on a Shakespearean literature study abroad in England. It was amazing. It was so cool. I had a job in finance, and this felt just awful. I couldn't figure out what it was exactly. I feel like my soul is slowly being sucked away, and I don't know why. It was really cool because my dad was in management, and he knew about a way to assess your aptitudes. It was called the Johnson O'Connor Foundation. I got tested and it was extremely helpful to me because one of the things that I found out is that numbers is not my strongest suit. Diaphoria, I was off the charts. I can have a lot of ideas. I love that. Creativity is extremely important to me. That was part of the problem. No place in finance can you be creative. So I went back and did teaching for a little while, and now I'm into writing. And so I also feel like one of the things that I think both of our stories shares is like none of us are just one thing. And I think it's great to develop those different talents and to see those parts of ourselves and to acknowledge that and to kind of like feed that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the thing that helped me with wanting to become a writer, and I'm still not writing full time. I still have a day job. I still haven't achieved my dream fully. But one of the things when you're studying in college, you pick a major based off of what your career is going to be. And I was always a little tentative to say, well, I want to do creative writing because you hear all the horror stories of an arts degree where you can't make a living. And so if there is absolutely a balance. I don't want to sound like I'm telling anybody, don't chase your dream. But in part of chasing your dreams, you also have to consider how it's going to work for you. How are you going to be able to make a living or be okay with maybe meager living that you might start out with? There's always ways to increase what you're making, but I couldn't make it as a business major because that stuff didn't interest me. If I had forced myself to, I'd probably be making more money than I am now, but I didn't enjoy what I was doing enough for that to be worth the sacrifice. If I were to jump all in right now, feet first, say I'm going to write full time, I've got 3 beautiful daughters at home that deserve to eat. If I can't afford to pay for that, that's shame on me. And so there's a balance of I got to chase my dreams and I got to be able to find a very reasonable way to provide for myself and to be okay with that. And so not, chase your dreams, find out what you're passionate about, but also find a way to make that work for you and to be able to accept the lifestyle that would afford you. And once you can address those things, so many worlds open up to you. But this podcast is a prime example. It was that creative bug and also balances and business aspects with advertising and marketing and all that conglomerate together. And you're working it out. You're stoking a lot of different fires, I guess you could say, which is true for a lot of creative minds.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think it's tricky. One of the things that came out of this was some of these aptitudes that you have, it's going to be hard to find a job. And I totally understand what you're saying. You do have to take care of the needs of your family, hopefully some of the wants of your family as well. These things can serve as a hobby. I also feel like you're striking a really good balance right now because for those of you that are tuning in via video, Bennion is on his full-time job, and so he's sneaking time in his commute. So we are joining him in a car. I think that that's a prime example. Like you're doing your day job, but also trying to sneak a little bit of creativity in there.
Yes, I'll just say, if you really want to pursue something as a hobby, as a job, as a living, or some mixture of the two, I know that God wants you to do everything. And he will show you a way to make it happen. I think that's very evident. My wife is the women's president in our ward, and she just did a little devotional about the goal setting program. We were working on her presentation together, and it blew my mind just thinking about how important it is to God for us to pursue things that make us happy and how he will make our pursuit of our hobbies and our interests a vital thing in our lives and an important thing. And he's so efficient as our creator that he can take our little nuances and our niche projects and turn them into something incredible. Just piggybacking off what my wife said last week in her devotional, she quoted Nephi. A lot of Book of Mormon scholars say that he was likely really into metalwork, metalcraft. When he draws the sword of Laban, one of the first things he says is the sword is of exceedingly fine craftsmanship, right? He recognizes, oh, this is a cool sword. And he's the only one of his brothers that has a metal bow. Is it likely that he made that bow himself? It's all within our acceptability. And then let's say he's into metalcraft. When he lands in the Americas, he forges swords based after the sword of Laban. I couldn't do that. I could look at a sword and be like, that's a really cool sword. I could not go and say, well, I'm going to forge one and make one that's kind of like it, right? And so there's a lot of hints that he knows what he's doing when it comes to sword. But then at one point, he gets asked to build a boat to save his family, and literally create a whole nation that comes from this labor. He's asked to build a boat by God. And his first question isn't, how do you build a boat? His first question is, where do I find ore to make the tools? Whatever our interests are, God's going to find a way to make that a vital tool in the gathering of his sheep. I know that's true. So whatever your passion is, in whatever degree you want to pursue it, God will help you make that happen, and he'll make it worthwhile in your life and the lives of your family and the people around you.
I think that's such a good point, and that's really interesting, and one that I hadn't considered before. When he is drawing the sword, that he's like, "Whoa, this is cool." I have not noticed that before. One idea that occurred to me, and I would be interested in what you thought about it, as you're talking about the goals. I think it's interesting that they're well-rounded, right? Because God's not just interested in our mind or our bodies or our spirits or our social skills. He wants us to try and balance all of those out and ideally have a goal or something that we're working towards all of those different things. And I wonder if it could be true as well of our livelihoods, that he would want a well-balanced life as well. One of the realities is we have to have money to survive. We have to have food and shelter, and that is the reality of the world we are living in. Maybe if the source of the work that you are doing doesn't fulfill your creativity, you find balance in another way. What do you think about that?
I love that. It's the hierarchy of needs, right? So sometimes I can't focus on other things because I have to provide for my shelter. You all come across hard times where sometimes you don't get to think about some of this other stuff. Focusing on what's important in that moment is very vital. So I don't want to sound like, well, I would love to write or dance more, but I can't because, I've got something I got on. That is a sacred responsibility too. And you're doing what you're supposed to do. And as you keep doing that, you will find opportunities to see these other aspects of your life. I mentioned that I worked in mental health for 10 years. I worked in residential treatment and with troubled teens. We talked a lot about rounding out your life. And a lot of these kids wanted to live a high adventure life, but they were going down the wrong avenue. So where can you find some of that same stuff in other ways? I hated my job. I hated what I was doing. And a fact that came up that actually changed the way I look at my work is, if you enjoy your job 60% of the time, that's considered a very likely job. If your job isn't in whatever your passion is, my job's in sales. I have no sincere, extreme passion for pipes and waterworks and sewer equipment, but I would say I enjoy my day job 60% of the time. For a lot of us, we don't like that, right? Then there's the 40% that really stands out. We're like, oh, I don't like this 40% of my job. And then what happens is a lot of us leave our 60% job that we like 60% of the job for a job that we only like 40% because it's that missing 40%. Well, then you actually like it less, right? It's actually a worse job for you. And so for me, I work in sales and I work in waterworks. I have no great passion for it. It's a good job. I would say I'm at that 60% mark. In that job, I work a lot. I'm on the road a lot, like today, but I'm also work from home a good portion of the time. It gives you plenty of time to write. I don't enjoy talking about waterworks and pipes and sewer systems and all that stuff a ton, but I do like the life that it gives me. And so I can say, I'm going to stick with this job and allow it to be my family and allow it to give me time to be my creative side and to write and to join writing groups and then to attend writing conferences. That is a fantastic thing. I can't complain about that. It is all about balance, rounding yourself out. And sometimes saying, oh, you got to take the good with the bad. Even if I were a full-time writer right now, which is my dream, there would still do stuff about it that I wouldn't like. Does that make sense?
I really enjoy what you're saying. One question I have for you, you mentioned that you have been recently diagnosed with ADHD. Tell me what that has changed in the way that you think about yourself.
So my diagnosis, I think, was an absolute miracle. Even though I worked in the mental health field and I probably should have been able to recognize the signs in myself, One of the ones I like to laugh about is that with ADHD, a lot of times caffeine doesn't affect you the way that it does for most people. I would drink caffeine and I could fall asleep. Like I would have a Red Bull right before bed and fall asleep, no problem. I never realized that I had ADHD. I had a lot of self-loathing. I used that word loathing quite literally, where I'd get so frustrated with myself. I had a lot of what they call executive dysfunction, where I'd get stuck on the couch because I had a long to-do list and I couldn't get anything done. Or my very loving wife is a go-getter, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's a great thing for me to have in my life, her go-getter attitude. But there were days where she'd give me a list of things, hey, let's get this stuff done around the house. And it would be so hard on me. And I didn't have the wherewithal to be able to describe it to her. It was so hard for me that anything new that was put on my plate was overwhelming. I remember I was coming home from a trip. I had stayed a couple nights on the road working my sales job, and I come home and I'm really down. I just feel like I'm walking through mud. My heart is heavy. My mind is overwhelmed, and I'm just struggling. All aboard the struggle bus. I got this prompting clear as day in my mind. You have ADHD. And I thought, that's crazy. Don't know why I would think that about myself. This is one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had in my life. I looked into it and researched it, Googled it, and and there was a test that was, said take at home test on the internet, see if you have ADHD. And so I took the test, and there was 20 questions, and it was like the threshold of 15. If you get 15 out of 20, then you have ADHD. I got 20 out of 20. And I thought, well, that's one take at home test, who knows? And so I looked it up and I found a couple more tests. All of them were like, you have so much ADHD in your brain. And I talked to my wife about it. She was the same way. She was like, no way. And I was like, look at these test results. Listen to this. And so we would read through some of the symptoms. And she was like, oh my goodness, you have ADHD. And I reached out to some of the therapists I used to work with and talked to them. And one of them was actually like, you didn't know that? Like it's written all over your face, dude. How did you know? I was like, it would have been so great if you could have told me when we were working together. That would have been phenomenal. I got on medication and it was a new day. Part of me is a little bit embarrassed to be like, oh yeah, I have a chronic mental health condition. But the greater part of me, that is a small sliver of my heart that feels any embarrassment or shame. The greater part of me is so thankful that I have been able to get diagnosed and that I can have a new outlook on life. And then with it, there's a lot of creative abilities that come with ADHD that, you can think of things differently. ADHDers can come up with great stories and great worlds in their brain. And that's obviously something I, as a writer, enjoy. When I got on my medication, it's been even better. Now I can finish a story and I can think of something fun and cool that I enjoy and then finish it. And I'm not stuck with the inciting incident in the story, which is where I would often get derailed. And so now I've been able to finish since then 2 manuscripts, and it's been a great experience. I'm working on a third, still working on finding homes for these manuscripts, but they're great. They're good stories. And I know that I'll find something for them. I know that it'll work. And even if it's not these ones, because of my diagnosis, I'm writing better, more entertaining stories. I know eventually I'll be able to get something out there that the world enjoys. So if anybody out there is struggling with any sort of mental health, go seek help. It will only bring you happiness. Sometimes it hurts a little bit at first, but it's only good in the end. If you're worried about physical health, sometimes taking medicine can make you feel a little bit off at first. But once you're on it, once you're better, then you're better. Please go get the help that you need. Don't wait for years like I did and suffer through unnecessary pain.
What a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I don't know if you have heard of Kim and Penn Holderness. They are YouTubers that have gone viral. Anyway, Penn has pretty severe ADHD, and he is the spokesperson for ADHD, and he has shirts that says like ADHD is awesome. He has a creative mind, and the things that he's able to put together are phenomenal. And I think that one of the things that is great is recognizing like you have a beautiful mind. Because of your ADHD, there are things that you get to create and things in your imagination that are fabulous. I also think it is difficult as a teacher having that as a background. I can speak to the classrooms pretty well in that our classrooms are not the best place for kids that have ADHD. And I also almost wonder if our society as a whole, the things that we value, like our productivity, are not conducive to an ADHD mind thriving well. And so to take those parts of your life and be like, this is a wonderful thing. And also, I am in this world and I have to find a way to be a part of it. And what can I do to make those two things mesh? Your thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. And I think that's true for most mental health conditions, that there is a balance of, yes, you've got to seek help and you need to find ways to cater to whatever your condition is, depression, bipolar disorder, ADHD, whatever you're struggling through. You do need to find ways to cope with that. But then you also still function in this world. This world still exists. And yet classrooms aren't super conducive to ADHD. So yeah, there is a downside, and you do have to learn how to cope with those things. And there's so many tools and outlets and different coping mechanisms that we can find and implement in our lives. But it is, and I say this with all the love in the world, it is up to each of us to treat our own conditions. It's not to the world. And that's a harsh reality. I think it's true that if I'm working my job as a salesman, if I can't finish sales and I let my ADHD distract me or pull me away from the job that needs to get done, I can't get mad at my boss if he says, well, you're not doing the job that I hired you to do, right? I have to find ways to dig my heels in and to find ways to focus. For me, a lot of that is medication. I know there's a lot of people who also include physical exercise, which I could probably do more of, but there's different ways to cope with it, but that's your responsibility with your brain and your body to find ways to cope with these things. And some of that coping too, I'll say, is just communicating. I was supposed to go to a conference on the other side of the country. It was in Indianapolis, and it was a big waterworks national convention. It was enormous. And, it's an important deal. And the only time I could get into the psychiatrist was over that week. I was so nervous to call my boss because I was like, he's going to say no, and I'm going to have to wait several months to schedule another appointment. I called him and I was like, can I miss this conference? This is what's going on. This is what I'm struggling with. And he was so supportive. He was like, go to that appointment. Don't come to the conference. We'll cover for you. And he was like, what do you want me to tell people? Do you want me to say it's a doctor's appointment? Do you want me to say you just couldn't make it? And I thought, no, tell him it's a doctor's appointment for a mental health, to see a psychiatrist. I think it's okay to be open about that. I appreciate him checking to make sure it was okay with me, but in saying that it's your responsibility to find your coping mechanisms and find ways to work through whatever you're struggling with, I think you will be surprised at the people who are willing to be supportive. Might be hard to cope with it, but being open to communication and talking to bosses, parents, loved ones, partners and wives and husbands, you will find different ways that other people are going to be able to help you. And that is part of healing yourself. I always struggle because I don't want to sound too harsh and be like, oh yeah, well, it's your problem if you have some issues, but it is up to you. No one else is going to heal you. You have to find the courage to heal yourself, and that responsibility rests on your shoulders. But I promise you, you're strong enough. Whoever you are out there, you are strong enough. If I could do it, I promise that you can do it.
What I hear you saying is it is like our own responsibility to seek the help that we need. However, we might be surprised about those around us, how supportive and caring people can be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I also feel like it seems to me there's a shift about like it used to be, oh, he has a mental health issue. And then I feel like people are just like, yeah, that just is like a brain, probably our most important muscle. And just like any other, it can get sick and needs to be addressed as well. I do feel like that shift is happening.
Yeah, totally.
Some of the best moments happen when we slow down, share stories, and connect with people around us. That's why I want to share something special with you. Soda beers. Soda beers isn't just another drink. It's crafted with intention. Alcohol-free, just bold, nostalgic flavors designed to bring people together. Whether you're celebrating, catching up with a friend, taking a moment to reflect, it's about savoring the experience. This brand is close to my heart, not just because I love the taste, but because it's part of my family story. And I love that it's always been about more than just a drink. It's about connection, community, and creating moments that matter. So if you're looking for something refreshing, something crafted with care, Give Soda Beers a try. Pick up a can, share it with someone, and make a moment out of it. Just like this podcast is about walking in purpose, Soda Beers is about creating something meaningful, something that brings people together. And that's worth celebrating. Cheers! I'd like to talk about imposter syndrome. Is that something that you've experienced, or what is your opinion?
Well, I don't think I'm successful enough to have imposter syndrome yet, but that is absolutely true. For me, I wouldn't necessarily call it imposter syndrome. Maybe this is exactly what it is. I don't know. But I for sure feel the weight of failing and not recognizing that you're failing upward, if that makes sense. So as an author, you write a beautiful manuscript, which every author knows the first story that you write is an absolute Nick Harry
Winner.
Potter. Yes, it's in millions and billions. You're thinking, what am I going to say when I meet the Queen of England, right? Like this is it. And then you go to submit it and you send it off to literary agents or publishers. About 90% of the time, they don't ever respond back. So your beautiful work of art is just probably in their garbage, honestly. And the ones that do respond back tell you this is not good enough. And what you hear isn't this is not good enough or this isn't ready for publication yet. You hear you're not good enough and you're not ready for publication yet. And so it's so easy to shut off and to say, well, I'm obviously not talented. I'm obviously not very good. And that's hard. You get rejected, especially in the writing world. You get so many rejections, so many, and not even rejections, just being ignored that you're never good enough. It's hard with that. And even then, failures, I guess you could call them, but now I think I'm in a good enough space. Signed on with the publisher for Joby Jade and the Monster Under Her Bed, which is a very cute book written for my oldest daughter. It talks a lot about mental health and, it's a fantastic story for any, I would say, elementary school aged kid. But the publisher I went with, the first person to say yes, and they're a great publisher. I don't want to badmouth them at all because they've been absolutely wonderful. But they had published traditionally horror stories and romance stories, and we're branching off into like children's stories. And I thought, well, this is perfect. I'll be the first one in. And we learned the hard way that marketing horror and romance is very different than marketing children's stories. And they were at a loss. They couldn't do it. So they were very kind. And, I was so excited that I finally had a book in print, and I'm very proud of that piece of work. But, I think I've sold maybe 100 copies. And they've been very kind. They've shut down their children's division since then, but they've said, we'll leave your book in kind of an on-demand print. So they'll print it as ones are ordered. But for the most part, they're not marketing it with me at all, which is fine. It's just out of their realm of expertise. Even thinking, I finally have a book in print. Well, now it's not the right publisher. And now, there's great work of art. My Nick, the Nick's Harry Potter, the world not getting to see this amazing book because I picked the wrong publisher. I signed the first contract that came across my desk and it wasn't right. And now we're shopping it around again and trying to find a new home for it. And my publisher is being absolutely fantastic about helping us find a better place for it because it is a good story and it deserves a good home. Looking at that as a failure or as a learning experience. The truth is, it's both. It didn't happen the way I wanted it, but it's going to make me better for the next time. The next story, I'm shopping around a manuscript called Piper Page Will Touch the Stars for my second daughter. That's just as cute. Instead of about monsters under your bed, it's about aliens and from planet to planet and saving the world by being just the person that you are and not having any superpowers or anything. And now I know I'm not going to publish that with foundations because they don't do children's books. I don't want to do that unless something were to change drastically. And now I know that the first contract that comes across my desk, I might not sign. I know to study it a little bit more and to take a little bit more time and to make sure this is going to be a good place. And truth be told, I'll probably fail with that manuscript as well. You know what I mean? I probably won't work out the way I want it to. And that's okay. I'll learn. And then hopefully 10 years from now, I'll be back on this podcast and be able to say, oh yeah, I learned so much and had so many different experiences. And this is how I kept failing upwards. So you're going to trip and fall. And when you stand up, you're going to be a little bit taller. And it's a wonderful journey. It hurt, but it's a wonderful journey.
I like that idea of falling upwards and that, the different times that you have the different learning experiences and it informs the next time you're going to do. Ours is an interesting industry because Amazon has changed the world for everything. But
Yeah.
in particular, publishing, gone are the days where you're like, okay, publisher, here's my book, take it from here. You are part of the marketing. You are a part of advertising. That was just one part of it. And now here comes the next. And so that's a totally different skill set.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something that I wasn't ready for with having a book out. I am not a social media guy. And I mean, the way book talk is a thing, where one of the best marketing tools to sell a book right now is TikTok. And I'm like, I am a middle-aged man. I cannot start TikTok. I should. You know what I mean? There's a lot of different ways to do it and people who can sell books without it. But that sometimes you have to bite the bullet. Going back to that 60% enjoying the job, do I want to throw in the towel on writing because I don't want to do the marketing side because that's not the fun part? I like writing stories about monsters and aliens and magic systems and all this fun stuff. I love that. But do I love trying to figure out how to get in touch with the right group of parents and begging people to buy my book? That's not nearly as fun. But am I going to throw it all away because I don't like that one part? It's tough to say. For me, personally, I'm going to work through that because that's what I want to do. But each of us has to kind of make a decision. Is that too much? Do I need to move on because I don't like that aspect?
It's interesting that you bring this up. We've talked about mental health, and I feel like mental health is very important. And I think it's important to talk to licensed clinical therapists. There's a space for life coaching. I am a life coach. I work with other life coaches as well. Just yesterday, I was having a discussion with a fellow life coach, and I was talking about this very thing. I'm trying, and when is enough enough? Because it is hard. And I had to think about it, and I was like, okay, is this the moment where I'm done? It goes back to that 60%. And I was like, oh no, it is hard. Unquestionably, what we do is hard. You have to have resilience, and it can be defeating. I feel like failing upwards, like you have to have a mentality that you're like, didn't get this right. Lesson learned. Next time I'm going to do it different. But that kind of like, okay, I'm going to get back up. I'm going to try again is difficult. And I really like what you're saying about like, okay, but do you enjoy it 60% of the time? And yes, I think it's hard because what we do demands a lot of different skill sets. Writing, I enjoy that mostly 100% of the time, even though there's some things where you're like, oh, this isn't right. And how am I going to do that? But that's fun for me. So that part is 100%. But then everything else, like what you're talking about, you do have to use social media. If you are going to be a published author, I think it's part of the game, in my opinion. Not that it has to be TikTok, or probably can't be TikTok, right? Because it's banned in the US.
I would gonna change it now, but that void will get filled. So whatever's next, it'll come.
Even if you had been like, okay, 100%, I'm going to be in TikTok. Now you can't. So now what? Like if your whole platform was on that, it's like, who knows the next thing that's going to come? Because I also feel like AI, I just read an article that said whether we embrace it or not, it is going to be a part of our world. It already is. Now what? I think that persistence is difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. You think, oh, I want to write a story right now in the fantasy world. Fairy fantasies are really popular. And so we're looking, if I started today and wrote a book, best case scenario, 2 years from now, it gets on the shelves, right? And that's actually pretty quick. You talk to a lot of people and it's sometimes even closer to 3 to 5. Do I know that fairy fantasy is going to be what's selling in a couple of years? The truth is, we have no idea. And even half the time, your publishers don't know. They're taking guesses and thinking, is this going to be the next big thing? Is this book going to hit the wave at the right time? And who knows? It's such a risk. For every New York Times bestseller, amazing book out there, I think there's countless others that are sitting in someone's trash bin or in a lost file on their computer that is just as good, but was written at the wrong time. And that's a hard pill to swallow. So that's something to consider. Talking about like well-rounded stuff, like feeding your creative side, but also having a realistic view and saying, is this something that's going to be big? Maybe the market comes back around. Doing your market research and getting your hands a little bit dirty is important. I know a lot of people who feel like that cramps their creative style. Like, I'm going to write whatever story I want, and if it's good enough, someone will take it. And there is truth to that. Nobody will ignore you if your stuff is good enough. But you got to hit the wave at the right time. You got to pay attention to what's selling and what's doing well. I've always wanted to write like Brandon Sanderson-esque high fantasy type stuff. But I'll tell you what, People like my children and middle grade fiction a lot more. I think it's because I'm a silly little boy on the inside. And that's fine. That's okay to admit this is what I do best, to accept who you are, to love who you are, and to cultivate the skills and talents that you do have.
Where can we find your stuff?
I have my website, BennionEllsworth.com, that you can find links through there. I love coming and talking to schools. So if you want to have someone come by and talk to your classroom or anything, I love doing that. My Jovi Gave the Monster Under Her Bed is about mental health. So you can schedule through BennionEllsworth.com. And then you can find me on Amazon. You search Bennion Ellsworth, Jovi Jade and the Monster Under Her Bed. It pops up. It's intermittently been on and off on BarnesandNoble.com. So I would just recommend going through Amazon.
Is there anything else you want to add before we end our conversation today?
Keep going. To whatever that means for people wherever you are, just keep going. If you're having a hard time as a writer or as a creator, keep going. Just keep at it. If you're having a hard time in your life and your mental health, keep going. I promise the struggle is worth it. Whether the struggle for you is just being a mortal human being, or the struggle of trying to share your creations and your art with the world, just keep going. I promise it's worth it. I promise there will be a day where you can stop and take a look and say, man, I'm so glad I kept fighting. And I know that's true. So keep going.
Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and keep bringing your visions to life.